right, welcome back to another episode of the Psychopedia podcast. I'm your co-host, Hank Sinatra, here with my co-host, Sorry.
Investigators later, it's okay.
There's no fun and no games.
I understand.
Today.
I understand.
I have never in my life been more nervous to do a podcast. Ever. I was on Ellen.
Yeah.
And I'm more nervous to do this.
How do you think I feel right now? I have a lot to live up to because I know how much this case affects you in general. And just like always, I want to be able to bring you something maybe you haven't heard before.
Oh, I'm sure you will.
And that said, it took me a lot of trials and tribulations getting through this, a lot of crying, a lot of walking away from my computer.
I have no doubt that you're going to do it justice. Just in case you're wondering what the hell is going on, this is the first time that I'm familiar with the story before I hear the story. Not only am I familiar, I was more familiar than her. I'm sure she's more familiar now than I am, but I will be. I'm going to learn everything she learned, just the easy way.
Cliff's notes, later notes.
So it wasn't a request. I think if I remember correctly, I remember requesting you not ever do this.
You did.
Because
you did, but I had to.
Yeah, we had to. This is our special edition 9/11 episode where we're going to cover whatever. You'll hear.
You're going to find out. You're going to find out. But I just want to mention that the first time I heard about this case was actually through Dave, who got a phone call from you. You were standing in the book aisle at Barnes & Noble, and you were like sobbing on the phone with him, telling him about this case. Then he hung up. He's telling me about it. Now we're both crying, and it stuck with me.
Yeah.
Obviously, for good reason.
I have not to this day. I don't remember when the initial video came out about this guy, but I have not since then been able to tell people what it's about without getting very choked up.
And you saw one documentary about this, correct? Yeah. So obviously there's been so many more that have come out. Yeah. But I'm glad that you haven't seen them.
Yes, me too. The ESPN 30 for 30 is what I saw. Just the music alone.
Mm-hmm. I cannot.
Okay. Well, listen. Thank you for being here. Thank you for doing the work. If you are a listener, thank you.
Truly, thank you.
Make sure you subscribe on Apple, Spotify, YouTube, all the platforms. And if you are, in love with us, which is very cool.
We dig you back.
Yeah. And you're not getting enough of what you want, go over to patreon.com/psychopedia, where I'm not even going to get into what we do over there because it's so much that I feel like it's like too much.
It's never too much. Oh, to go through it. I'm sorry.
Yeah. To go through it. You get 2 extra bonus cases a month, true crime, unhinged episodes weekly where we revisit a case, book club, live Zoom. We just did one with hospice nurse Julie for her book, Nothing to Fear. It was magical. And I'm about to announce the next book on there on Patreon.
Ooh.
So might be big.
Give me the inside info on that book first so I can get a head start.
Okay. So that's at patreon.com/psychopediapod.
And if you are on YouTube, maybe consider doing your part and leaving a heart because it makes us very happy when we see that and we appreciate it.
Yeah. Okay. I am just dragging my feet.
Brace for impact.
Okay. Without further ado, keeping it classic.
It's okay. That's what's happening from start to finish today.
Why don't you start talking so I can start crying?
Okay. What would you do in the face of death? Would you run? It would be human nature to flee, to seek safety, to escape the clutches of danger. We are wired to protect ourselves, to hold on to life with every ounce of strength we have. But sometimes, in the rarest of moments, something deeper than survival takes over. A force stronger than fear compels a person to act, not for themselves, but for others. Imagine the terror of being in the heart of the South Tower of the World Trade Centers on September 11th, 2001, with primal chaos all around, the air thick with smoke, the ground literally trembling beneath your feet. With every instinct screaming to run, would you? Would you race towards safety, leaving everything and everyone behind? If you would, that's human. No judgment. But what happens when that human instinct is overridden? When the drive to save oneself is silenced by a greater calling, a higher purpose? Because on that ill-fated, devastating, earth-shattering day in New York City, there was someone who faced this very choice. In the midst of unimaginable terror as the world around him fell to ruins and flames licked at his own skin, he chose not to run. Quite the opposite. He rushed directly into the belly of the beast over and over and over, with his determined mind fixed on one goal: to save others.
I'm all right. I can't.
It's okay. Let it out.
I'm not going to let it out because if I sob on the podcast, it's going to be gross.
No, it's not. He repeatedly went back into the 2,000-degree inferno to lead the way through the smoke-filled depths of hell, to guide the lost, attend to the wounded, and infuse the terrified with just enough courage to get out. He knew the risks. He knew that every step back into that burning building could be his last, but he never hesitated. Fear must have been there. Of course it was. How could it not be? But it was overshadowed by something far more powerful: a deep, innate sense of duty, of compassion, of sacrifice. He chose to shine as a beacon of hope for others in the absolute darkest of times. So, what would you do in the face of death? It's a question that digs deep into the core of who we are, and most of us may never know the answer, may never be tested in such a harrowing way. But again, there was someone who faced this choice over and over and over again, who understood the stakes over and over and over again, and made his choice without a second thought as death closed in from all sides over and over and over again. And because of that choice that he made not once, not twice, but 3 separate times, death did not viciously claim as many as it surely would have.
Note here, you kept saying over and over and over. I know the story. I love that you did that instead of just like vaguely saying he did it a handful of times.
No, you need to feel it.
Yeah. Well, I don't know if people would pick up on that right away.
It's
but
okay.
That's what it was.
Sometimes I write in a way, perhaps like your buddy Jay-Z, where it doesn't hit you until you're done. And you're like, whoa, wait a minute. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I mean, that's a bold claim. Sure.
I wanted to see what you would do with it, to be honest. I'm not saying I'm Jay-Z. I'm just saying that I try and take some creative
You're like
leaps.
Jay-Z, yeah.
Make a soundbite
You're Ed
out of that.
You're Ed Jay-Z-cent. Hello.
Hello is right. So this man who chose to stay, a man who refused to flee in the face of chaos, a man who defied the instinct to run, saving as many as 18 lives. In the heart of sheer devastation, this man stood tall and faced down raw horror with unwavering courage, his every step brimming with resolve as death closed in all around him. He was brave. He was selfless. He was the man in the red bandana.
Okay. All right. So far, okay.
Okay.
Are you going to talk about him when he was a kid? Because if you do, I'm not going to be okay.
We're starting from the beginning.
Okay. Great. I can't wait to hear this story in, insane detail.
Yeah, here we go.
Okay.
Wells Remy Crowther, a.k.a. the man in the red bandana, was born on May 17th, 1977 in New York City to his parents Allison and Jefferson. Wells was named after Allison's great-uncle, a man neither she nor her husband had actually ever met, but whose legend loomed large within the family and brought a sense of pride to anyone who spoke about him. Jefferson, who went by Jeff, originally from Maryland, met Allison, who's a New York native, on a blind date on September 11th, 1968.
Really?
Yep. It was love at first sight, and the two went on to get married. After spending some time in the U.S. Navy before earning a business degree from NYU, Jeff went on to become a successful banker. Allison graduated from Wheaton College in Massachusetts in 1970 with a degree in biology and secured a job at a laboratory where she conducted hands-on research on a groundbreaking treatment for heroin addiction using a helpful little-known substance known as methadone. Eventually, Allison left that job in 1976, and a year later, she and Jeff were expecting their first child, a baby boy they went on to name Wells Remy Crowther. From the time Wells was a little boy, he knew exactly who and what he wanted to be when he grew up, and that was a fireman. Both of his grandfathers were firefighters, and he would often visit their respective fire stations, one located in White Plains, New York, and the other in Hartsdale. Additionally, Wells's father and 2 uncles were also volunteer firefighters as well. Pop quiz, just to ease you into this.
Okay.
According to the National Fire Department Registry, what percentage of firefighters serve as volunteers?
After they retire, you mean?
No, in general. How many firefighters serve as purely volunteer, not volunteer, and they work
Gotcha.
purely volunteer? A, 35.4%, 69.8%, 81.2%.
C.
No.
B.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's high.
Hi.
I know.
I have this conversation all the time with Dave. I don't understand how it can be mostly volunteer. Like the town we live in is strictly volunteer. So the other night we had the really bad flooding here on Long Island from the storms.
Yeah.
And he was one of the few firefighters who made it out of our house and could actually be on call. He responded to 21 calls.
Wow.
And so many firefighters couldn't get out of their own homes. There's nobody at the station employed, like having to be there. So it's just, to me, it's so strange.
Well, I think in metropolitan areas, you have to have a full-time fire department that are paid because they can't do anything else. Out here, and in, less congested areas, I guess there's not as many incidents, and you have EMTs, firefighters.
I'm just saying, your house is burning. The fact that you have to wait for firefighters to get the call.
Oh, I know.
They're in their homes, get to the station, get in gear. You hope enough show up.
Yeah.
The rig is waiting to see if anybody else shows up. It's just time lost. I'm just venting. It's just wild to me.
You're not saying anything I don't fully agree with. It's absolutely insane.
Yeah.
It's run by volunteer firefighters out here.
Everything about being a firefighter captivated Wells. The blaring siren that shattered the quiet, the 75-pound weight of the heavy-duty gear that felt like armor, the powerful engines barreling through havoc like giants ready to charge into battle. He was drawn to the uniforms, the hoses that coiled like serpents ready to strike, and the adrenaline-pumping drama that came with answering the call to face down a raging blaze, daring someone to stop it. To Wells, the thrill wasn't just in running towards the flames, it was in embracing the challenge of taming it, of taking away its power as it forced others to flee, driven by innate courage and a deep sense of duty to protect. At just 4 years old, Wells would zoom around on the little fire truck that his grandparents gave him for Christmas, imagining it was the real deal, imagining he was the real deal. And while he eventually outgrew this beloved little toy, his passion for firefighting never faded. On the contrary, it grew stronger with time. Wells and his 2 younger sisters, Honor and Paige, were raised to have strong faith in Christianity. They attended church every Sunday where little Wells, now just 7 years old, would sport a full suit and tie. Noticing that his dad, Jeff, donned a spiffy white pocket square with his suit, little Wells asked if he could have one too. Sure, Jeff said one day, and left the room to find something small enough to fit into his little boy's front pocket. And when he came back, Jeff was holding in his hand 2 handkerchiefs, one that was white that was to be used for show in his front pocket, and one that was red, which was to be used for blow, meaning to blow his nose. Jeff placed the red bandana in Wells's back pocket and said, "You can always keep this back there. You'll always have it if you need it." Little did Jeff know that one day, 17 years later, his precious boy, who would grow into one of the world's most courageous men, would still heed that advice and would use the red bandana he kept with him to shield his face against thick plumes of smoke as he faced the deadliest terrorist attack in U.S. history. As Wells grew older, he fully embraced the invaluable lessons of camaraderie that he observed in the firehouse and thrived not just in that brotherhood, but also as a versatile team sport athlete. He excelled in various sports, including hockey, lacrosse, and football, where his competitive nature and teamwork mentality truly made him a standout player. And while he was not the tallest or the strongest player on the field, he was fearless in his actions and embodied the spirit of teamwork makes the dream work in everything he did. In fact, his high school quote was, "There is no I in team." Wells's love for each game was matched only by his deep-rooted traditions, because within each helmet he wore, tucked safely inside, was always his signature red bandana. Now, it wasn't always smooth sailing for this confident, athletic young Wells. During high school, he was bullied for being smaller than the other boys and for choosing not to follow the 90s grunge trend of ripped jeans and flannel shirts. Instead, he preferred polo shirts from LL Bean and Vineyard Vines. His peers even used to stuff him into his hockey bag since he was small enough to fit inside. Despite this, Wells continued to thrive, making the varsity hockey team as a freshman and emerging as a natural-born leader, always wearing his signature red bandana as he led his team to countless victories. Then, at 16 years old, Wells completed his county's firefighter training program over the summer as a junior member with the Empire Hook and Ladder Company No. 1 in Upper Nyack, New York. When he turned 18, Wells completed the New York State training program in firematics and became a full member of the company, fighting fires and responding to Signal 10 calls, meaning working fires, alongside his dad, Jeff. His friends used to say that when that pager went off, Wells went into Superman mode. No matter what he was doing, whether on a date with a beautiful girl or out with the boys, when a call came in, Wells responded. Then, in 1995, Wells graduated high school and embarked on his next chapter at Boston College, a picturesque campus spread over 175 acres with more than 120 buildings and halls nestled on a hilltop overlooking the serene Chestnut Hill Reservoir. Though standing at just 5'6" to 5'7" and barely weighing 150 pounds, Wells was undeterred by his smaller stature and aggressively played lacrosse for Boston College for 3 seasons, proudly donning the number 19 jersey, quickly establishing himself as a formidable force to be reckoned with on the field. Beyond the lacrosse field, Wells began to carefully chart his professional future as well and set his sights on a career in finance with the ultimate goal of working in Manhattan, where his ambition and relentless drive would undoubtedly position him well among the fierce and competitive wolves of Wall Street. And that's essentially exactly what happened. Almost exactly, because the firm he went on to work for in 1999, Sandler O'Neill, wasn't located on Wall Street. Rather, it was positioned 1,126 feet up in the sky on the 104th floor of the South Tower at 2 World Trade Center. Sandler O'Neill was an investment banking firm that was small but powerful, much like its newest employee, and it specialized in the financial sector. Wells quickly adapted to the demanding environment and fully embraced the whole blue eyes finance world.
Trust fund, 5'6", blue eyes.
Exactly. He donned a suit and tie every day and would occasionally spice up his vibe by wearing suspenders beneath his jacket, until one of the senior traders at the firm told Wells that he couldn't wear suspenders until he earned his first million. So Wells complied, and he never wore those long strips of functional fabric ever again. But what Wells did continue to wear, day in and day out, dress code be damned, was a red bandana tucked into the back right pocket of his dress pants. Wells's cubicle was just 10 feet from a window with a sweeping view of the East River, facing away from his apartment that at the time was located in Hoboken, New Jersey. Eventually, Wells decided to move closer to work and found an apartment in downtown Manhattan at 115 Washington Place for $2,500 a month. Despite the steep rent, Wells took it as a good sign. His new apartment number was 19, the same as his jersey number from his sports days. The connection felt like a positive omen, a small but meaningful detail that tied his new life in the city to the passion he always carried with him. Despite being a finance guy now, Wells never lost his passion for firefighting. He continued to spend time with the guys at the station and participated in events like the one in June 2001. So Wells was invited to join an evening cruise with the volunteer firefighters of the Nyack Fire Department and the Empire Hook and Ladder Company No. 1. They sailed on New York City's first Marine Fire Brigade boat, formerly named the John D. McKean, but commonly known as Marine Company 1. The boat was operated by Lieutenant Harry Wanamaker Jr., a 58-year-old Navy veteran, career firefighter, and Nyack police officer. Wanamaker, who was a seasoned veteran of the department, trained Wells when he went through firefighter training at just 16 years old with the Nyack Fire Department. Pop quiz. Who else was on that cruise who Wells spent time chatting with that evening? A. Mayor Rudolph Rudy Giuliani. B. Captain Chesley Sully Sullenberger. C. Actor Steve Buscemi.
C.
No. Tell us why you chose C, though.
Because he was a firefighter.
Yes, very good.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah, you fell for it.
B?
Yes.
Sully.
Yes. Sully, who at the time was part of the Marine One crew, would later become a national hero on January 15th, 2009 for his extraordinary role in what is considered the most successful emergency landing of a commercial jet in history.
Yeah.
He famously landed U.S. Airways Flight 1549 on the Hudson River after both engines failed, saving all 155 people on board.
Have you ever seen that movie, Sully?
I haven't seen it, no.
It's fascinating.
I've read a lot about him, though.
They came after him hard.
I know they did.
Yeah.
Unreal.
Yeah.
He was physically pulling people out of the plane after successfully landing it on the Hudson.
I know. They made it seem like he did it for fun.
Unreal.
You know what I mean?
I do. So anyway, that night on the cruise, Wells asked his father to take a picture of him standing beside Harry Wanamaker. And when he handed Jeff the camera, he instructed him to make sure that he got the Twin Towers in the background. A few months later, after continuing to immerse himself in the world of volunteer firefighters and individuals like Sully, Wells realized that his true passion had outgrown the financial sector. He felt an undeniable pull, a call that resonated far beyond the sound of ringing phones and market bells. It was the urgent, relentless wail of the fire siren, beckoning him towards something far more visceral, life-affirming, and profound. The fire siren was no longer just a sound. It was a summons, a call to his true destiny.
It was like his siren call.
Yes, exactly right. Yeah. So in early August 2001, Wells called his parents to share his decision to change careers and to apply to the FDNY. His plan was to stay in finance just a little bit longer to save money to ensure that he had a financial cushion when he transitioned careers. He also had hopes of one day getting married and starting a family, a future he spoke about with his parents over dinner on September 9th, 2001, just 2 days before 9/11. Which brings us to the morning of September 11th, 2001, when Wells found himself standing at the crossroads of destiny, where every choice carried the weight of life and death, and where the path he chose would echo far beyond that fateful day. The morning began with crystal clear blue skies. The night before, a cold front pushed down from Canada and swept across parts of the East Coast, which brought a brilliance to the unclouded skies that was serene and picturesque. You can even picture it now, right? I can. The beautiful sky in the background of what's to come.
Yeah.
It was a cruel, jarring juxtaposition to the unimaginable horror that would soon unfold beneath it. Jeff Crowther had planned to spend the morning golfing as part of a benefit outing sponsored by his former employer. Meanwhile, Allison was on her way to a business meeting crossing the Tappan Zee Bridge by 7 a.m. My own father, Joe Slater, was driving on the Brooklyn-Queens Expressway, the BQE, en route to a courthouse in downtown Manhattan. He was on the phone with my mother when the North Tower exploded before his eyes and was attempting to explain to her how the top third of the building seemed to be leaning over. As he tried to explain the horrifying sight of what appeared to be small black dots falling from the sky, only to later realize that he had been witnessing people jumping to their deaths to escape the inferno, he suddenly saw in real time, as if in slow motion, but at the same time inexplicably fast, a Boeing 767-200 slam into the South Tower. His exact words to my astonished mother were, "Holy shit, a plane just crashed into the second building." Traffic came to a complete halt, and time itself seemed to stand still. When my father ultimately came home, having been one of the lucky ones to be so close yet just far enough away, he and his car were covered in ashes and soot. I think it's probably safe to say that everyone who lived through 9/11 can vividly recall exactly where they were when the news broke. For me, I was running into one of my ex-sorority sisters on campus at the University of Maryland, and her asking me, "Brooke, have you heard from your family today?" And I was like, "Why? I don't talk to them every day." She said, "Because New York is under attack." The memory is seared into our collective minds, especially for those of us from New York, where this horrific attack literally hit home.
Yeah.
The impact wasn't just on the skyline, but on our very sense of security, shaking us to our core in a way that time can never fully erase. Younger generations, or maybe those unfamiliar with New York, with the US, might not fully grasp the true significance of the Twin Towers beyond their iconic appearance in the media. These were not just buildings. They embodied America's economic power and position on the global stage. On 9/11, terrorists aimed to strike at the very heart of this power with the intention of sowing fear and undermining the nation's strength. The attack wasn't merely on the physical towers, but on the spirit of America itself, leaving a deep scar on the national psyche and forever altering the global landscape.
Yeah, I'd have to argue it's even more home, obviously, for people who live in New York or from New York.
Sure.
Rather than somebody who lives in Kansas, maybe. Not that I'm like a professional, I get to be sadder than other people, but it really fucked me up.
Oh, yeah.
It really fucked me up.
Yeah.
I drove home. I remember driving home from University of Maryland on Friday, the Friday after the Tuesday, seeing the smoke from so far away. I was like, surely that can't be the smoke from the buildings. This happened 4 days ago. And it was like it just happened 20 minutes ago. It just sat there for so long. And then also I took the BQE home so that I could see, the view of what was going on. There was hundreds of people out on the streets with signs, flags, honking. It was like,
oh my God.
Yeah.
There were signs of people holding up pictures of loved ones.
Yeah, that's not what I'm talking about. That's
fine. I know, but I'm just saying.
Unimaginably horrific. But it was the first time I had seen nothing else matter except us being like.
What were the signs you saw? Camaraderie, like
25. It was like good signs.
United we stand type of
like that.
Thing. Yeah. Listen, it did bring this country together. It did bring New York together,
For certain people, other people had a much.
Agreed. I guess
I know you're not brushing past that.
I'm not.
It's a very complicated.
It is. I guess I'll speak for
topic.
myself.
Yeah.
I don't know. I never felt closer to my brethren here than after that.
Yeah, I don't know why we need tragedy to feel close to each other. I don't need tragedy to feel close to someone, but it certainly helps. It's almost like
you don't need it, but it does have that effect.
It's I wouldn't wish tragedy on anybody ever. Right. But if you're gonna go through something tragic, you might as well get something.
I think it brings you together because you realize how nothing else matters. If there was petty shit going on between you and these other people, you realize just how petty it is.
Yeah.
And that's why it brings you together.
Yeah.
The Twin Towers were the tallest buildings in New York City and stood at 110 stories each. One World Trade Center, which was the North Tower, and two World Trade Center, the South Tower, provided nearly 10 million square feet of office space for about 35,000 people and 430 companies.
They were so big.
Oh my goodness.
They were so big. And I just want to also mention the fact that maybe it's the younger generation of today, because they weren't around for the pre-9/11 World Trade Center life, but those buildings, they weren't built to be knocked down on 9/11. They had a whole life before that.
Absolutely.
So to forget that, or just to say, these buildings were, that's the buildings from 9/11. Yeah, kind of, 0.01% of their life was the end of it. But I can't imagine the amount of, I had a friend who worked at Windows on the World.
Yeah.
He didn't go into work that day. He told me there was so many stories of being above the clouds, seeing rainbows and sunrises, sunsets. He was like, it was the most magical place I've ever worked in my life. And he lost 80 of his coworkers that day.
God. Okay. For a brief period, upon their completion in 1973, they were the tallest buildings in the world and attracted roughly 70,000 commuters and tourists daily.
Really?
Yep. The towers were only separated by 131 feet, which was less than half of a football field. I knew they were close. I didn't realize they were that close.
So close.
The North Tower rose 1,730 feet with a large antenna, and the South Tower stood 1,362 feet high. Views extended 45 miles or more from the top of the towers in every direction, far enough to see all 5 New York City boroughs, New Jersey, and Connecticut.
Yeah.
Each weighed more than 250,000 tons and contained 99 elevators and 21,800 windows. Each floor was an acre in size, and there was enough concrete in the towers to build a 5-foot-wide sidewalk from New York City to Washington, D.C.
Really?
Also, and I don't think a lot of people know this, and this is to your point, Tank, in addition to the signature Twin Towers, the World Trade Center complex also included a hotel, 4 office additional buildings, a shopping mall, restaurants, a public plaza, and a major transportation hub, which was the Port Authority headquarters. So it was even more than just the 2 towers. Interestingly, and sadly, the towers had been the target of an attack before.
Yeah.
On February 26, 1993, terrorists with links to an Islamist extremist group detonated explosives in a van parked underneath the World Trade Center, killing 6 people and injuring thousands. But of course, it was the massive, literally groundbreaking attack that occurred on September 11th, 2001 that would forever etch the Twin Towers into history. Now, I want to guide you through the timeline of that tragic morning so that we can pinpoint exactly when and where the man in the red bandana made his mark on history. Now, just keep this in mind as we go through the timeline. There were 4 commercial passenger planes in the United States that were hijacked. American Airlines Flight 11, United Airlines Flight 175, American Airlines Flight 77, and United Airlines Flight 93.
I always forget about United Flight 93, but that's where Let's Fucking Roll came from.
What do you mean?
You ever heard that story?
No.
Oh, man. I mean, that could be a whole other podcast. That plane was chock full of heroes.
I know. That I know. I just didn't know that line. I assume one of them said that.
On the end of, like, in the black box, you hear somebody go, "Let's roll." And they attacked the people who were hijacking the plane.
Now that's going to make me... That's wild. I didn't know that.
Yeah.
I didn't spend all of my research time there, but...
The calls that people made from the flight?
That we'll talk about.
Will. This is going to be a 3-hour podcast of just stuttering and sniffling.
We got this. At 7:59 a.m., Flight 11 took off from Boston with 11 crew members, 76 passengers, and 5 hijackers on board. The aircraft was filled with 76,400 pounds of fuel for its transcontinental run to Los Angeles. At 8:15 a.m., Flight 175 took off from Boston for LA with 9 crew members, 51 passengers, and 5 hijackers on board. The flight was loaded with 76,000 pounds of fuel. At 8:19 a.m., using an in-flight phone, Flight 11 flight attendant Betty Ann Ong alerted American Airlines ground crew that a hijacking was underway, reporting that the cockpit was unreachable. The call lasted 25 minutes, with Betty providing critical information up until the plane crashed. Her last words were, "Pray for us."
That was Flight 11, you said?
Mm-hmm.
Which hit where? The Pentagon?
Flight 11? No, it hit into the North Tower.
Oh, my God.
Betty has since been declared a national hero. Because all of the information that she provided, she was able to provide the seats from which the hijackers emerged. And because she was able to provide that information, ground control was able to walk it back and see who was sitting in those seats. And
yeah,
it was crucial information.
Yeah.
And she thought and knew to give it in her final moments.
Consummate professional.
Shortly before Betty's call, a hijacker, likely Satam Asukami, had stabbed the passenger seated directly in front of him in first class. The passenger, identified as Daniel M. Lewin by the flight crew, had served 4 years in the Israeli army. The final report of the National Commission on Terrorist Attacks upon the United States speculates that he may have tried to stop the hijackers. Lewin was likely the first person killed in the 9/11 attacks. At 8:32 a.m., another Flight 11 flight attendant, Madeline Amy Sweeney, provided key information about the hijacking as well, including a description of the perpetrators to colleagues on the ground. 12 minutes before that, Okay, 'cause things were happening simultaneously. At
Yeah,
8:20 a.m., Flight 77 took off from Washington Dulles International Airport to go to Los Angeles, along with 6 crew members, 53 passengers, and 5 hijackers on board. The flight was loaded with 49,900 pounds of fuel. At 8:24 a.m., Flight 11 lead hijacker Mohammed Atta pressed the wrong button and unwittingly alerted controllers of the attacks. Minutes later, he again made an unintended transmission to ground control that was picked up by the pilot of Flight 175, who informed the Federal Aviation Administration of what he heard 8 minutes before his own plane was then hijacked.
Wow. Can I say something here?
Please.
To people listening? If you find yourself getting wrapped up in all, whatever with the details of this, she's telling a story, laying out a timeline, painting a picture. Whatever you think about whatever happened, I would beg you to put it aside so that you can hear the story that we're trying to tell here, which is about Wells Crowther. So just put it aside for the time being.
Even if you have your input, which you're entitled to have.
Yes, you're entitled to have your opinion.
This is our take on this episode. This is Wells' story.
I would just ask you to put it aside so that you can focus on what's really important here.
Thank you.
Okay.
At 8:37 a.m., Boston Air Traffic Control alerted the U.S. military to what was going on, and in response, Air National Guard jets were mobilized to identify and follow Flight 11. At 8:42 a.m., Flight 93 took off from Newark International Airport in New Jersey within minutes of the other hijacked flights. 7 crew members, 33 passengers, and 4 hijackers were on board the San Francisco-bound flight, which was filled with 48,700 pounds of fuel. 8:46 a.m., the North Tower was struck by American Airlines Flight 11. The plane crashed into floors 93 through 99, instantly killing everyone on board, as well as hundreds of people inside the building.
Such a gigantic thing flying into a building. 6 floors worth?
Yep.
Of the world, not like miniature floors, full
Football
blown.
fields.
Yeah.
6 football fields.
Oh my God.
The crash also severed all 3 emergency stairwells and trapped hundreds of people above the 91st floor. At 8:46 a.m., responders mobilized and North Tower evacuation began. New York City emergency dispatchers sent 23 engine and ladder companies, 12 chiefs, and 10 specialized units to respond. Additional Port Authority Police Department units were also dispatched as well to aid in evacuation and rescue.
Mm-hmm.
At 8:50 a.m., the United States President, George W. Bush, was alerted.
Which is a very famous meme.
Very, very famous. For those who may not know it, he was reading a story to elementary school students when somebody whispered in his ear that New York City was essentially under attack.
Yeah.
And he just kept reading his story.
Yeah, didn't want to alarm the kids.
Right. 8:55 a.m., South Tower was declared secure, which kills me, with the following message broadcasted by a Port Authority fire safety employee throughout the building. Quote, "Your attention, please, ladies and gentlemen. Building 2 is secure. There is no need to evacuate Building 2.
Oh, man.
If you are in the midst of evacuation, you may use the re-entry doors and the elevators to return to your office. Repeat, Building 2 is secure." 4 minutes later, at 8:59 a.m., both towers were ordered to evacuate.
Looking back on it, it's so clear. You have to, like, let's say we were doing this podcast right now and somebody flew a plane into a building. I mean, that's probably too reminiscent. Something that has never happened before happened. Literally not one person knew how to respond and react.
I think exactly right. I think that we learn and grow from tragedy. I think now if a similar situation were to happen and there was any type of explosion or something, you see something, you say something, something's not right. Now the immediate response is everybody get out.
The first plane hitting the building was such a shock. I mean, I can't imagine that anybody had the foresight to know that a second plane was going to strike. Like, that was just even less likely than the first one striking the building.
That's well said.
Yeah.
I agree. At 9:00 a.m., passengers on board Flight 175 began calling their family members to say goodbye. And 3 minutes later, at 9:03 a.m., Flight 175 crashed into floors 77 through 85 of the South Tower, killing all 51 passengers and nine crew members on board the aircraft, and an unknown number of people inside the building as well. The impact rendered 2 of the 3 emergency stairwells impassable, remember this, and severed a majority of the elevator cables in this area, trapping many above the impact zone and inside the elevator cars.
Yeah.
Shortly after the hijacked Flight 175 struck the South Tower, some workers in the building began to jump to their deaths, a phenomenon that my father had witnessed and described as looking like a pepper shaker.
Yeah. I mean, you have to also understand that they're probably in the middle of a raging fire.
Absolutely. It was...
And it's like...
You're choosing your final moments.
Yeah.
Estimates of the number of people who died as a result from falling from the Twin Towers range from 50 to more than 200.
Yeah.
At 9:37 a.m., Flight 77 crashed into the Pentagon in Arlington, Virginia, across the Potomac River from Washington, D.C., killing all 53 passengers and 6 crew members on board. The crash and ensuing fire went on to kill 125 military and civilian personnel on the ground. At 9:59 a.m., the South Tower collapsed in 10 seconds, killing more than 800 civilians and first responders inside the building and in the surrounding area.
Again, 1 plane hitting a building, highly unlikely. 2, it's like when you drive past a cop on a highway, you're like, I can speed a little bit. Like, there's no way there's going to be another cop a mile down the road. That false sense of security. So 1 plane flies into a building, so unfathomably unlikely. A second one, what the hell is going on? Not one person thought those buildings were going to collapse.
They were deemed indestructible as well.
Yeah.
It's like the Titanic. You know what I mean?
Yeah. They're a little loose with those indestructible.
Right. What's indestructible?
Labels, huh?
You throw 76,000 pounds of fuel, you smash it through floors and floors and floors.
Yeah.
At 10:03 a.m., 4 hijackers crashed Flight 93 in a field near the town of Shanksville in Somerset County, Pennsylvania, after passengers and crew stormed the cockpit. The 33 passengers and 7 crew members on board perished.
You got to hear that
They
audio.
went down fucking swinging.
They really did. That guy organized an attack.
I read about it. I didn't hear it.
Oh.
At 10:28 a.m., the North Tower collapsed after burning for 102 minutes. More than 1,600 people were killed as a result of the attack on the North Tower. So that's the timeline.
Which is crazy to think about, because you said there was, 70,000 people that
would visit every day. It was early, too. People were just getting into work.
Yeah.
Within hours of the attacks, some rescue workers and journalists began referring to the scene of mass destruction at the World Trade Center site as Ground Zero, a term typically used to describe devastation caused by an atomic bomb. First responders, search and rescue teams, and volunteers continued to arrive at Ground Zero throughout the day, driven by the urgent hope of finding survivors. Rescuers employed specialized tools to probe voids and search through the rubble for remnants of stairwells and elevators where survivors might have been sheltered. The final successful rescue occurred around midday on September 12th.
Wow.
There were 14,154 people in the Trade Center on the morning of September 11th, 2001. And one of those people was 24-year-old Wells Crowther. He left his West Village apartment at 7 a.m. as he'd always done, wearing his suit and tie as he'd always done, keeping his red bandana in his back pocket as he'd always done. Wells was already in his office when the first plane ripped through the North Tower. The force of the crash was so great that parts of the plane flew out the opposite side of the building the length of 5 city blocks before landing on the street.
Yeah.
Wells would have been able to feel the extreme heat emanating from the North Tower. Confusion in the South Tower was intensifying, understandably, as many realized that a plane had just flown into their sister building.
Oh, what was it, like an accident? Like a little prop plane or something? No, sir. It was a gigantic... Boeing.
Many people in Wells's firm of 83 were discussing whether or not they should leave, with some of them saying, "We have small kids, we should leave." But then the announcement came through the emergency broadcast system telling them to stay in place, so many chose not to evacuate. Then, in an instant, they no longer had the choice to leave, because Flight 175 ripped through the floors beneath them, sending the entire South Tower into a violent sway. The scene that had just moments before been filled with people debating whether to evacuate or stay in place was transformed into a death trap, a nightmare of unimaginable horror. Hundreds were suddenly dead or dying, blown apart in the explosion. The walls and ceilings around them had vaporized, and the building itself began to disintegrate, losing its structural integrity. Those who survived the initial impact were left severely wounded, disoriented, and in shock, trapped in a crumbling tomb as chaos, fuel, steel, and blood erupted all around them. At 9:12 a.m., Wells, always thinking of the next person, realized that his parents were probably very worried about him, as they likely heard about what was unfolding. So he made a decision that moment to call his mother. It went straight to voicemail, and Wells left the following message. Quote, "Mom, this is Wells. I want you to know that I'm okay." Those were the last words his family would ever hear him speak. As Wells took inventory of the death and destruction around him, he did not run. He did not seek cover. Instead, he snapped into immediate action. Wells began assessing the situation while looking into the terrified eyes of those who were still alive. One woman named Ling Young, who was a 49-year-old tax auditor, had been thrown from one end of the elevator sky lobby to the other. She sat in a daze, blinded by plumes of black smoke, unable to even process that she had been severely burned and that the skin on her arms bubbled and that her skin was literally sliding off. As she later explained, her burns were thermal, meaning her flesh was quite literally cooking. Ling recalls sitting in a paralyzed daze, absolutely unable to even move out of fear, shock, and her severe injuries. She knew that survival was out of the question, until she heard a man's voice calling out from the smoke. Clear, strong, commanding, yet kind. The voice said, "I found the stairs. Follow me. Only help the ones you can help. And follow me." For the first time, Ling found the strength to stand up. She was compelled by this voice, this guide, this undeniable force and lifeline that pierced through the chaos. It was as if his words wrapped around her, lifting her up from the paralysis of her fear, urging her to move, to survive. She wasn't just following a voice. She was responding to the call of a hero. This voice, which belonged to Wells Crowther, was someone who was not only alive, but who had chosen to stay. Someone who seemed to firmly believe that anyone still there could make it out alive. His words carried a promise of safety, and with each step, Ling felt her resolve harden, as if his bravery was fueling her own, as well as those around her who were also being lifted up and guided by this man. It was nearly impossible to see more than a few feet in front of you, but there was one feature that Ling absolutely noticed and would never forget. And that was that the voice cutting through the chaos belonged to a man who covered his face with a red bandana. And this man steered her and countless others toward one remaining stairwell, walking behind her and urging her to keep going. As Ling turned again to look at this beacon of hope, this hero, this man in the red bandana, she noticed that he wasn't alone. He'd been carrying a wounded woman across his back, all the way from the 78th floor to the 61st floor, where the one remaining stairwell existed. Ling recalls thinking that the part of the face that she could see beneath the bandana had looked so very young. A baby face, she called it. The man, Wells, handed Ling a fire extinguisher and urged her, along with the woman he had been carrying, to continue walking down the one remaining stairwell. Then he reversed course. He could have stopped, but he didn't. Instead, he went back up so others could come down.
17 flights of stairs.
Wells climbed 17 flights back up into the belly of the scorching hot beast as his lungs filled with smoke and his own injuries seared and throbbed, passing detached body parts, including a leg still in a red high heel and a severed head. Wells did not waver. He did not question his own mortality. He did not question his calling. He simply answered it. Guiding more people from the sky lobby down 17 flights of stairs to the stairwell, Wells continued his courageous efforts despite the growing intensity of the smoke and the rapidly deteriorating conditions. Wells moved with a calm urgency, his red bandana tied around his face, a symbol of hope for those he led. Even as the building structure weakened and the chaos around them grew, Wells remained focused on saving as many lives as possible. Then, after heroically delivering more people to safety on the 61st floor, he reversed course. He could have stopped, but he went back up so others could come down. Wells gathered another group of wounded survivors, including Ed Nichols and a woman named Judy Ween, who worked on the 103rd floor and was lying on the ground in agony from a broken arm, cracked ribs, and a punctured lung. According to Judy, Wells was putting out fires and administering first aid as he announced, "Everyone who can stand, stand now. If you can help others, do so." Then he directed the next group down 17 flights of stairs to safety. Then he reversed course. He could have stopped, but he didn't. Instead, he went back up so others could come down. With his red bandana covering his face, Wells guided another group of injured survivors down 17 flights of stairs, where firefighters stood ready to take them down the rest of the way. And Wells kept going, kept pushing, kept climbing, kept saving, until there was no building left to reverse course in. Because after his third successful rescue mission, in a moment that defies comprehension, Wells reached the end, not of his courage, but of the building itself. As he breathed what wound up being his final breath, the South Tower began its catastrophic collapse. In just 10 heart-wrenching seconds, the tower disintegrated, ruthlessly taking with it the lives of those still inside, including Wells Crowther. And as it collapsed, as a hole in the skyline suddenly appeared like a portal from hell, Wells's father, Jeff, watched it happen in real time on television.
His father in that video?
Oh my God.
Oh man, he loved him so much.
So much. They were truly best friends. As he watched this unimaginable reality unfold, knowing that his only son was inside what once existed but was no more, his strength gave way to unbearable anguish. Jeff fell to his knees and his voice broke as he pleaded in the face of unspeakable loss, "Dear God, take me now. Leave him here. Please take me."
Okay. All right. Okay. It's getting worse for sure. I've held out pretty good. I knew once you started talking about the father, that was it. He's
in interviews after, which you've clearly seen, he's like, "I just miss him. I just miss his companionship. I just miss my best friend." Days passed for Jeff and Allison with no word about whether their beloved child had survived. I think those days too of the not knowing, but having hope, but not really having hope, must have been excruciating. First 1 day, then 2 days, then 3 days. But it was on that third day, September 15th, that Allison, Wells's mother, suddenly felt her son's presence. She described it as an undeniable energy filling the dark corner of her room. And in that moment, she knew it was Wells, letting her know that he was there with her in spirit, but gone in body. With tears in her eyes, Allison whispered, "Wells, thank you." After that moment, Allison, along with Jeff, who had been tirelessly searching for Wells and who stood in long lines on Lexington Avenue and 26th Street in Manhattan, filling out reports and submitting items with Wells's fingerprints on it, finally stopped looking. 6 months later, on March 22nd, 2002, a policeman showed up at Allison and Jeff's home. To Allison, he said, "Mrs. Crowther, your son's body has been recovered at Ground Zero." Wells was identified by his fingerprints and was technically discovered 3 days before on March 19th. 19, of course, had always been Wells's number, so this seemed fitting for his family. In the first 10 months following the attacks, more than 1,200 victims were identified at Ground Zero, with fewer than 300 being found intact. Incredibly, Wells's body was recovered mostly intact, without any burns, in the debris of what had been the lobby of the South Tower, meaning he had made it all the way down from the 104th floor before his death. How was he so close to getting out, but didn't? Why was he in the lobby and not safely outside? The exit was only 75 feet away. Then it was revealed that Wells's remains were found in an area where 11 firefighters' remains had also been recovered. Specifically, Wells was found very, very close to FDNY Assistant Chief Donald Burns, who was the chief in charge of the South Tower rescue effort on September 11th. In other words, Wells was found at the command post. He had no intention of leaving. Rather, he was actively joining the official response team. Eyewitness survivors reported that after the plane hit into the sky lobby of the South Tower, a man suddenly appeared out of nowhere. He was stripped down to his t-shirt and wore a red bandana over his nose and mouth to protect him against the smoke and debris. This man in the red bandana organized a rescue effort on the floors high above where the official rescue workers had been able to reach. He called for fire extinguishers, calmly yet authoritatively rounded up and directed the confused and wounded survivors to the only stairwell that was open for escape, and as I mentioned, carried a woman on his back down 17 flights of stairs before returning back up to do it again and then again. Wells's final hour of life remained a mystery until an article about September 11th printed in the New York Times on May 26, 2002, titled "Fighting to Live as the Towers Died." In this article, Wells Crowther's story came to light months after the attacks when survivors began sharing stories of a man in a red bandana who helped them escape. And it was through these unbelievable firsthand accounts that Wells's family and the rest of the world, including you and me, and now all of our listeners, came to learn of his extraordinary heroism. After reading this article about a, quote, mysterious man who appeared wearing a red bandana over his face, Allison gasped and said, "Oh my God, Wells, I found you." She knew. Mm-hmm. After the story of the man in the red bandana broke, it essentially went viral, spreading like the very flames that Wells so bravely faced. CNN, USA Today, ABC News, his story hit all the major media outlets and captured the hearts and minds of people across the nation, the world, who were still very much grappling with the trauma of 9/11. The attacks killed 2,977 people from 93 nations. 2,753 people were killed in New York, 184 people were killed at the Pentagon, and 40 people were killed on Flight 93. And while all of those innocent, precious lives were taken, the resilience and spirit of humanity survived. To that end, pop quiz. What was discovered on the World Trade Center site after the towers collapsed and later became a symbol of resilience? A, an iron cross firmly mounted into the ground. B, a calorie pear tree. C, an FDNY axe.
A.
No.
Well, it was, but.
Oh, really? I made that up. I thought I made that up.
Very famous. Sorry.
That's weird. Maybe that's why it was in my brain.
Yeah.
Okay, what else?
A pear tree?
Yes. Yes. With snapped roots and burned and broken branches. This tree was left severely damaged in the aftermath of the attacks, but it persevered. The tree was then carefully removed from the rubble and underwent extensive rehabilitation. Then it was returned to the 9/11 memorial in 2010. And now the survivor tree, as it's called, with its new smooth branches sprouting from its once scarred stumps, has become a living symbol of resilience, survival, and renewal. For me, as always, I find myself asking, why? How? What was it about Wells Crowther that made him act so selflessly, so courageously in the face of unimaginable danger? What inner strength, what values and principles drove him to run towards the flames when others were fleeing? Because his actions weren't just the result of a single moment of bravery or a snap decision, surely. Is there a hero gene? First of all, no, there is no hero gene. But research in genetics and psychology indicate that certain genetic factors, such as variations in genes linked to oxytocin and vasopressin receptors, which are the hormones associated with social bonding, may influence a person's propensity for pro-social behavior, including heroism. Additionally, personality traits like empathy, moral reasoning, and a sense of responsibility, often seen in heroes, can be shaped by both genetics and life experiences. Environmental factors, such as being raised in supportive settings or having relevant training, also play a crucial role in fostering heroic behavior.
That's what I was going to say. The love of his parents, that was just so apparent.
And he was raised in the environment of the brotherhood/sisterhood of firefighting.
Yeah.
And I see that and experience it. And my children live it.
But he was like that. I mean, I'm sure maybe your kids will grow up to be the same way, because his dad...
My older one, you've seen him.
Yeah.
He is, all in.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah, it's coming back to you.
But Wells' dad just loved him so much. I'm sure that was from day one. And whatever little formation that was happening in his brain and whatever as he's figuring out who he is as a person, that was in there from the start.
I agree.
You know?
Expanding on this idea of environment and heroism is a man named Philip Zimbardo, who's a Stanford psychology professor emeritus who famously wrote a book in 2007 titled The Lucifer Effect, Understanding How Good People Turn Evil. Zimbardo works to explore the duality of human nature by examining both evil and heroism. After his famous 1971 Stanford prison experiment, which you have to look into. Okay,
I know all about that.
It's wild. Showed how ordinary people could commit atrocious acts under authoritarian roles. Zimbardo decided to shift his focus to heroism. It's like he toppled it on its head.
Yeah.
Zimbardo's research, alongside contributions from other psychologists like Zeno Franco, has delved into the psychology of heroism, investigating whether ordinary people can be trained to perform heroic acts. Their studies, which include real-life examples such as the bravery of 4 men during the 9/11 attacks, suggest that heroism might be cultivated through specific training. Initial research, including studies on heroism training for children, indicates that traits like courage can indeed be developed. According to Zimbardo, just as people can be influenced to do extraordinarily bad things, they can also be inspired and trained to perform heroic deeds as well. It was this very idea that led him to establish a nonprofit called the Heroic Imagination Project, which actually teaches people how to develop the mindset necessary to act heroically in critical situations.
We're wired to be good to each other.
Yeah, we've talked about this, right? You asked me if I believe that's the case or if I believe the opposite's the case, that we're wired to not treat each other well and we just fight that urge.
I mean, it's so clear. You just look at the biology. Like that book, The Power of Kindness by Piero Ferrucci, where he says that when an act of kindness is done, 3 parties benefit: the doer, the receiver, and anyone who witnesses it. He also talks about research that, I mean, it is, even I know this, and I'm not like a research guy. When you are like kind to people or someone's nice to you, you're over a long period of time, every biological marker improves. You live longer lives, healthier lives. You feel less stressed. Cortisol is down. Blood pressure is down. You just feel better.
Yeah.
As opposed to acting like a piece of shit and feeling like that.
Right.
Because there's no way to act bad and not feel bad. It's just, it is what it is.
And I think I think there's a world where people act bad, they feel bad, but they misinterpret those bad feelings for maybe it feeling good because it's something they're familiar with. Like there's psychological complexities there. Because I do think people choose to do bad things and feel bad because they enjoy it. But I'm not saying they enjoy it in the pure sense of the word joy.
Yeah.
Maybe it's familiar. It feels safe to them. Maybe they were mistreated, so they're just sort of regurgitating that. And do you know what I'm saying? Like their interpretation of sadly, of joy is feeling negativity.
No, not to know you right away, but the self-loathing, which we've talked about, where when trauma and self-centeredness intersect, self-loathing imprints on that person in that moment.
Mm-hmm.
The more traumatic and the more frequent, the greater the self-loathing. So that I believe most people think that if you were in a car with your conscious mind and your subconscious mind, the conscious mind is driving and the subconscious mind is trying to get it to go to the donut store or whatever. It's not that way at all. The subconscious mind is driving 100%. You, at the top of it, are trying to go, no, I don't want to do, I want to do this. I want to do, I want to be good, but you're driven by things that are beyond comprehension.
But didn't you just say the opposite is true?
No.
That people are really wired to be good?
I'm not talking about wiring. I'm talking about psychology. You're talking about psychology versus biology.
Okay.
So psychologically, human beings as a species are wired to be good. Whatever happened in that person's life that makes their subconscious want to drive them towards pain, that's a different thing. You can make choices, obviously, even especially if the pain gets great enough, but the everything in our body starts to shine on tests when we're good to each other and philanthropic and have empathy and all that stuff.
So let's just feel good, people.
Just be good.
Let's just all do good shit all the time.
I keep drilling this into my son's head. You can't feel bad after doing good. Even if, let's say you twist it and go, well, I did a good thing and somebody was not nice to me. Well, then you did it with expectations and you did it wrong.
Mm-hmm.
Do the good thing to do the good thing. Giving kindness is its own reward type of thing.
Yeah.
It's even harder to feel good after acting bad.
For sure.
By good, I mean actually good, not you get an ego boost or you start to feel powerful. Those are not necessarily good or bad. They're just qualities. But I would gather that if you gain power by doing bad things, you're never actually going to enjoy it.
Yeah.
It's never going to be enough.
Some deep shit, man. Got an early dose of Tank Stadies today. For Wells, I think the idea of his environment plus his natural inclination to do good checks out. His character was forged by an entire lifetime shaped by a deep sense of duty, but it was also his uniquely high level of compassion and unyielding personal desire or calling to help others that served the greater good in the end. Wells' story is not just one of heroism in the face of danger. It's so much deeper.
Mm-hmm.
He made everyday choices and small acts of kindness that prepared him for that fateful day when he made the ultimate sacrifice. Mm-hmm. It's like Judy Ween said, one of the women who he rescued, quote, in his mind, he had a duty to save people. People can live 100 years and not have the compassion, the wherewithal to do what he did.
There's also this idea of a soul contract, which I like, that the Reiki healer woman told me about.
Mm-hmm.
When my friend Chris killed himself. She was like, that's the way it was always going to be. And I know you don't like that. I do, because I just don't argue with reality. But I feel like Wells even more. Like, this was what he came here to do.
It's funny because in this context, I believe it.
Yeah.
I bring you back to the intro. What would you do in the face of death? Would you run? Again, fortunately, most of us will never have to confront that question. But we know what one man did when faced with that very choice. Wells Crowther's story is a shining testament to the profound goodness that can emerge even in the darkest of times. In the face of horror, when the world was quite literally crumbling around him, he became a beacon of hope, a symbol of the boundless potential for humanity to rise above fear and self. Wells didn't just react to the crisis, he embraced the call to serve others, embodying the very essence of heroism. His legacy challenges us to believe in the power of one person to make an outstanding difference, to change and save lives, and to inspire hope even in the most hopeless of situations. Wells Crowther's story isn't just about one man's bravery. It's a powerful narrative reminding us of the enduring light of humanity, a light that shines brightest in the most devastating of moments. I'd like to leave off on the words of former President Barack Obama, who delivered a speech on September 11th, 2014 at the dedication of the National September 11th Memorial and Museum.
Yeah.
Because incredibly, though unsurprisingly, President Obama chose to speak about the man in the red bandana. And he said this: Wells was just 24 years old, and after the planes hit, he put on that bandana and spent his final moments saving others. He called for fire extinguishers to fight back the flames. He tended to the wounded. He led those survivors down the stairs to safety and carried a woman on his shoulders down 17 flights. Then he went back up all those flights, then back down again, bringing more wounded to safety, until that moment when the tower fell. They didn't know his name. They didn't know where he came from, but they knew their lives had been saved by the man in the red bandana.
Is that it? Is that the end?
Yeah.
Okay, I made it.
Yeah, you did. You did great.
I have never been so quiet
I know.
for such an extended period of time I want to say my entire life.
Wow.
When we went to Washington, D.C. years ago, I went to the Vietnam Memorial Wall. I've never been in a physical presence where the gravity was so apparent. It was like there was no signs that said, keep your voice down or please be respectful. It was just like inherent in stepping on that rock that there's no fuckery here. Zero. And there was kids there. It wasn't like, it wasn't packed. It was packed, but nobody was saying a word.
Right. It's just this unspoken, knowledge.
Reverence.
Yeah, that this calls for our deepest respect.
It feels like the reason I didn't say much was because no matter what I said, I felt like I wasn't going to improve upon what he did.
Listen, you said everything great. You had a lot of good input, but I also think that there's not too much to say. This is a different type of episode for us, a different type of case. We're not sort of like analyzing and talking motive and talking this, talking that. We are just telling the most remarkable story about, somebody who touched our hearts.
And if you get a chance, just go on YouTube and search The Man in the Red Bandana, ESPN, get that, whatever it is. What was it, like
13 minutes.
13 minutes.
Yeah, they have obviously so many more now.
Yeah, but that's the one.
But that's the one that got Tank, and that's the one that got Dave, and that's the one that got me. And that's the one that you have all been benefiting from today.
Yeah, that, it's just perfect.
Yeah, it was very well done.
The pictures of him as a little kid with the
fire truck and the red bandana.
Yeah.
I know.
Yeah. I mean, even if he didn't do this, the fact that a little boy from one day on for the rest of his life held on to the red bandana.
Yeah.
Like it was a part of him.
It was a part of him.
And then to have that, like the part of the story that rocked me in, obviously the video, was the fact that these parents had lost their child. They knew they lost him, but they didn't know. And then they didn't know what happened. And then they see an article about this man with a red bandana who was saving people. And they were like, oh my God.
She goes, I found you.
Yeah.
She knew.
I mean, two very distinctive factors. One, he had a red bandana. Two, he was saving people.
Yeah.
And that's the story that he leaves us with,
There's a children's book about the man in the red bandana, authored by his sister, which I bought. Beautiful. I recommend it.
Yeah.
I recommend going to the memorial site.
Yeah.
And watching the documentaries, reading all the books. I hope I did him justice, but there's
Yeah,
certainly
you did.
a lot that can be uncovered about him, and it's worth it.
No, for sure. When Jessica and I got married, we did like a mini moon because we had no money, and we went to Michigan and then New York for our.
And then New York, you went home. Mini moons are great, by the way.
Yeah, we drove to Mackinac Island, which is on the Upper Peninsula of Michigan, and we spent like 2 or 3 days there, and then my mom paid for that because she loves the Grand Hotel. She loves this movie Somewhere in Time, and the Grand Hotel was featured in that movie. This hotel it's so funny to me because it was built in like 4 months in the early 1900s or late 1800s. I can't remember what it was. And it looks every bit of it.
like charming, or like it needs a makeover?
No, like if you drop a chapstick on one side of the hallway, it's rolling so fast to the other side. You're almost walking like V8 commercial. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Everything is just fucked up and fun, but it's still standing.
Yeah. Well.
So then we booked a room at the Millennium Hilton downtown, and our window happened to be facing the World Trade Center Memorial, which I didn't even know about. It wasn't open yet, but we could see down into it. I remember that.
Yeah.
I remember thinking, oh my God.
Dave, this 9/11, so the day that this episode will be released, is actually running in the 34.3 Foundation run to represent the 343 first responders that were killed on 9/11. So he's going to be running 34.3 miles with other firefighters from Long Beach to Ground Zero carrying the American flag.
Wow.
That's what he's been training for. And when he trains, he wears his firefighter gear on the treadmill to train. And there's a big sign in our basement that says you can never train too hard for a job that can kill you.
He's not wearing the firefighter gear when he does the run, is he?
No, he's just carrying the American flag when he does the run.
I feel like even having to carry a phone.
Oh, I said to him, forget the gear on the treadmill.
Yeah.
Hold a flag while you're training.
With wind.
Get the coordination down. You know what I mean? Anyone can do it. It's going to be him.
Yeah.
But yeah, he has a calling as well, and always has. We really both do in our own ways. Like I've always been drawn to the military, and that's why I went to the University of Maryland. And what you explained you felt at the Vietnam Memorial is how I feel in DC, period.
Oh, yeah.
I worked on DC, it was an internship for 6 months. Every fucking day I was there, I was crying.
That's work.
I could not believe I was in the Capitol.
Yeah.
Could not believe it. My biggest regret is not serving in the military. Dave also has grown up with this calling, and he's now fulfilling it.
Yeah.
And he's battling fires. He's putting his life on the line every time he goes out.
He's a pretty well-rounded guy,
Dude.
Firefighter Dave.
Dude, he's the most interesting man in the world.
He might be a perfect circle.
That's good.
That man is a blemishless sphere of a man.
I know.
Well-rounded as fuck.
I know. It's so effortless for him, which is so annoying for me.
No, I don't think it's effortless. I think he puts a lot into his life.
He puts a lot into it, but it's his second nature. It's his calling.
Yeah.
Like, do you know what I mean? So he puts a lot of work into it, but like his emotions are on point.
Yeah.
You know, so.
Yeah.
This is his t-shirt, by the way. Anybody on YouTube? The firefighter t-shirt.
Yeah. Yeah.
So anyway.
All right. Well.
Rest in peace, Wells Crowther.
Yeah. Thanks for leaving us with this story.
And rest in peace, everyone who was taken.
Yeah. Yeah.
On that day.
Well, I can't believe you sat through all that research and brought it here. And I can only imagine. Because I'll tell you what I'm going to do right now. I'm going to go into my house, watch The Man with the Red Bandana, and cry.
Yeah, well, that's what I did.
Real hard.
That's what I did. Like snot cry.
Oh, I hope nobody's home so I can like go.
Oh, yeah. And I kept going down to Dave. I'm like, Dave, is this true? Is this true? And I'd run things by him. It was. It's extremely. I was crying for so many reasons too, as you are too. It's like so horrifically sad and tragic, but so fucking moving and inspiring.
Yeah.
You know?
Real moving.
Anyway, thank you to everyone who sat through this case and endured the ups and downs with us.
Yeah. Thank you for listening. See you guys at the next episode. And that's it.
Yeah, thanks for listening. Bye.